Facebook, Russians, and elections. Three brilliant topics that should be talked about more often in context. So Mike is going to talk about it today on this episode of the Not So Critical Update. Really messed that one up, didn't I?
This is a clip that has definitely been making the rounds in U.S. media, online, on television. Breaking headlines. We're obviously a couple days late to the party, but we record once a week, so it is what it is. I'm going to play the clip. Basically, Zuckerberg's talking about their, you could call it content moderation policy, or you could call it censorship policy around the 2020 election. So let me play the clip.
I mean, basically, the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, like, you should be on high alert. There was, we thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of that's similar to that. So just be vigilant. So our protocol is different from Twitter's. What Twitter did is they said you can't share this at all. We didn't do that. What we do is we have, if something is reported to us as potentially misinformation, important misinformation, we also have this third-party fact-checking program because we don't want to be deciding what's true and false. And for the, I think it was 5 or 7 days when it was basically being determined whether it was false, the distribution on Facebook was decreased, but people were still allowed to share it. So you could still share it, you could still consume it.
So when you say the distribution is decreased,
it got shared.
How does that work?
It basically, the ranking in newsfeed was a little bit less. So fewer people saw it than would have otherwise. So it definitely.
By what percentage?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's meaningful. But I mean, but basically a lot.
All right, let's stop it there. So,
oh my God, that guy's so boring.
Couple things about this story. Any initial reactions? This is the first time you've seen it, Peter. Here in the U.S., it's been on a constant loop, pretty much everywhere online or on television.
Oh my God, he took a long time to get to the point of just saying, "Yeah,
it's hard following Mark."
Yeah, wow, he's so boring. He's just got a very. I think I might play that clip to get to sleep tonight. Genuinely starting to nod off there. But okay, so the trick is that, not the trick, the gist is they just didn't show misinformation that they knew about as much.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I guess I have a hard time understanding what's so controversial about that, other than we like it if it's our team, but we don't like it if it's their team. So I don't know.
Yeah.
A couple things stood out to me about that. One is, if the FBI knows about a disinformation campaign that's going to affect Facebook and Twitter, I think I would want them to tell Facebook and Twitter. They didn't say, hey, this story's going to break and we need you to suppress it. They just said, be on alert. This, obviously, according to Mark, behind the scenes, who knows what actually happened. So from that standpoint, the framing of censorship versus content moderation, I think, is a little selective. But also, how does it take 5 to 7 days to fact check something like that? You're one of the most powerful companies in the world during a very important time on an important topic, a news article that's in headlines everywhere, and it takes 5 to 7 days to find some sourcing on it. That seems sus.
Yeah, that's bullshit. I suppose the only reason I could think is that they just have a massive backlog and no way to prioritize things, which is dumb. I suppose it's definitely an excuse, right?
Or the U.S. government created guidelines for them that they had to follow.
That take 5 to 7 days?
And those guidelines hindered production.
Yeah, that's bullshit. Whatever. So tell me, like you said, it's been playing. Sorry, I didn't interrupt you there, John, but I'm going to carry on talking anyway. So why is it on the news so much in the US? Like this is just. Also, why the fuck is Zuckerberg on Joe Rogan? Like, what is he doing on that show? Is that like promotional to their target audience or something, or is he trying
probably to? Joe Rogan is what, the biggest podcast there is,
right? But isn't it like a very politically leaning?
Joe Rogan's demographic are all Facebook users.
What's that? I mean, everybody's a Facebook user.
Joe Rogan's demographic is what, far right leaning.
Yeah, that's my point.
This is a conversation about bad things that happened to Biden and his son. Right?
Ah, okay. So
it all makes sense.
Right.
The lines are all there.
Rogan's kind of a complicated guy. He certainly was like moving towards the right pretty heavily for a while. I would say he's still right leaning, but I don't know if I'd go so far as to say heavily right leaning. I think the same is true about Zuckerberg. I think all indications are Zuckerberg is fairly conservative.
100%. Yeah, of course.
He's on Joe Rogan's show, right?
So that helps him in his company.
As to why this is getting so much coverage, I think it specifically has to do with the topic of the story. That the story they're talking about was a politically charged story at that time that just so happened to help one side and hurt the other side. So we have lost sight of the fact that Russian interference in election is real and is a problem and shouldn't be something that we tolerate regardless of whose side it benefits. So instead, we're stuck talking about all this bullshit around the edges.
Which is most likely what the Russians wanted, right? It's always to the intent is probably it is secondary to cause problems with the data that's being leaked. What's more of a priority is to cause a fracture and continuously grow that fracture among the two sides. I just watched a pretty terrible show on the Peacock network called The Undeclared War. It's a UK show about a girl at GCHQ who's in the middle of Russia's like biggest attack. It's fiction, but they cover some pretty good points regarding Russia's misinformation tactics and their intent and how they hide their intent behind ulterior motives. So it is pretty interesting, and it is something that's really hard to stop because of the resources that Russia has in terms of just pure brute manpower in front of keyboards.
I had a chance to interview earlier today, in fact, Michael O'Hanlon from the Brookings Institute, and he was talking about Russia and their cyber warfare capabilities, and exactly like you said, John, how effective they have been at creating division within, in this case, the U.S., because they know a divided country is a weak country. They've been incredibly successful at doing that. And then we kind of leverage that conversation into the invasion of Afghanistan. But we'll actually have another story, I think, later on. We're going to talk about Mikko Hyppinen, and in some of his videos, he talks about Russian cyber capabilities. So it's no joke. It's a very real thing. It definitely had impact on the 2016 election, the 2020 election. I have to imagine they're doing it kind of at a baseline level all the time. And it really, unfortunately, I don't know, like, I just hate how it's politicized by both sides. I mean, after the 2016 election, they were constantly used as a scapegoat to excuse poor performance on the Democratic side when it was just a weak campaign. I don't know what you want. Like, yeah, it's an issue, but it's the reality of the situation.
They definitely zoom in. Both sides zoom in on the wrong issue, right? It's not that gigantic, a ginormous amount of people are getting swayed by false opinions or false truths or fake news or whatever you
actual
call it.
Fake news,
Literally,
not just
fake
unfavorable news.
saying, you know, one that comes to mind is the campaign that against Hillary, and I am no fan of Hillary, but that she claimed to say to Barack, why don't we just drone the guy, when they were discussing Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder. And that never happened. That conversation never occurred. And that's just like one example of, do you see Mike bouncing? That's just one example of
the news in real time.
Changes in the public's eye towards, you know, political figures. And instead of people questioning this, they take that fact at face value and change their opinion on their on the party that they choose, on their trust, the trust in their leadership. It's really fucked up. And they don't look at the bigger picture, which is this isn't verifiable. A lot of the information that's being distributed isn't verifiable, or at least not verified. And they just let it happen. And Twitter and Facebook, of course, to blame as well. Moderation should be their biggest priority, but
I wanted to talk about that more specifically. If we look at the content moderation role of these gigantic social media platforms that control or facilitate so much of our day-to-day communication, most people would say they get their news from social media. Huge amplifying factor. The misinformation could be coming from Russia. It could be coming from inside the country. It doesn't even matter. The idea of content moderation is one of the pieces of evidence, quote unquote, that certain politicians are using to go after the platform protections on Section 230. But I don't think you can argue that the platforms have some responsibility here. I mean, should they be moderating this content?
Well, it should either be that they are clearly, literally bannering this across their site, that they don't moderate news, at least not effectively, and that things can be posted that are inaccurate. They claim to be they've been labeled the central news source of the world, yet do no work to maintain that. Yeah, just
giant banner that says this site is for entertainment purposes only.
Pretty much, because it's currently, as we saw with the last US president, Twitter was the de facto announcement platform for legislation and changes and opinions, and that's super dangerous because, just like we saw, that's hackable. Obama got his account hacked, and
Trump got his account hacked multiple times.
And it's not that this is on them, specifically on Trump. It definitely is because of the password that he used, but it's more so also on the platform. Obama's account didn't get hacked directly. Twitter got hacked, and through a super simple attack, they got accounts taken over by what? It was Elon, it was Obama, it was a few other big names, and they made like $200,000 because they tweeted some crypto.
Oh, the crypto thing. That's right.
Yeah. They could have imagined what they could have done with this, but instead they went it was almost like a troll. Like, let me show you how weak these platforms are. And zero work, it feels like, has been done to improve the current view of these platforms. That's where it's really dangerous, because Twitter and Facebook are not that's not what they're meant for, but that's what they're being used for. Yeah.
You have anything to add, Peter?
Not much.
Just hanging back.
Yeah. On this one, it's the thing about the platforms like this is that you can say what they're meant to be for and what they're not meant to be for, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It's what they're being used for that counts. You can put something out into the world and have the best of intents, and it'll immediately get warped into something different. The same with moderating content. I find it very difficult to come to a coherent point of view on whether platforms like this should moderate content or not, because it's so hard. I don't think lack of moderation has shown, complete zero moderation has shown time and time again that it will just descend into anarchy almost immediately. If you have strict moderation, then it's sort of kind of a censorship, but that can be okay if everybody doesn't mind. And something in the middle always has problems because there's always something that comes down on one side or the other. So yeah, I think John's right. You have to be very clear about what the rules are. But then when you're very clear about what the rules are, you're instantly opening yourself up to gaming. Like when somebody knows what the rules are, they know which rules to break and how to break them. And then you can make more and more complicated rules to handle different exceptions and blah, blah, blah. And then you end up with fucking law books, right? So yeah, I don't know. I don't have really a good opinion that's noteworthy for that. It's a tough situation. I don't think that Facebook should have ignored this completely or just toned it down a bit. Hey, we know this is wrong. We're just going to not show it quite as much as normal. Like, that seems wrong.
I think taking a clear stance, excuse me, and being transparent on the fact that your platform sucks and is being used to manipulate hundreds of millions of people's opinions is the right way to do it. Like, yeah, you should throw a banner up. You shouldn't have a news page. Like, these are all things that shouldn't be happening on Facebook. But at the end of the day, Mark's making his billions.
That's the thing. So one thing I was comparing this to in my head was the lack of moderation of child abuse material on Facebook, which is a major source of that kind of thing. I think there's no excuse for Facebook not putting more effort into that because they spend such a tiny fraction of their revenue on preventing that kind of thing. And then I thought, well, if they could do it, they should be doing it for that. Why shouldn't they be doing it for like blatant, Russian propaganda that's hindering US democratic elections?
And UK.
And UK, yeah, whatever. I mean, we were talking about the Trump or whatever, but yeah, everywhere. Just anything that the Russia wants to stick its fingers into. And there is no reason why they shouldn't. They're making billions, right? They make billions in profit, not just as like revenue, but actual profit. Yeah. And making slightly fewer billions, but having a more a platform with integrity would be better for the world. So yeah, but then hey, capitalism.
And it doesn't even have to be misinformation. It could actually be true. There was some truth to this specific story that they're talking about, right? But it was being manipulated, falsely amplified. It's a super tough problem. And this is where, with all the social media stuff, I very often go back to identity verification.
Throwing your mobile in the phone. I think you're in the lake. It's great.
Yeah. I always think that the core of the problem is anonymity online. If you know who's posting something, you can make a determination as to whether they should or not, or whether it's trustworthy or not. And if you don't know, anybody can get on and say anything they want. And it's a huge amplification tool, even if people shouldn't have that.
That's a tough one, man. I don't think we have the time in this particular episode to dig into that.
I'll bring it up again.
Say, yeah. Well, anyway, I'm looking forward to talking about how exactly you're wrong, but we'll have to save that for another episode.
In the meantime,
fuck Facebook.
Yeah, fuck Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah.